I sing alago, alago. Them vex, complain, them say.
Nigerian musician, songwriter Fela Anikulapo Kuti is credited as being one of the creators of Afrobeat music, which he developed by fusing traditional Nigerian music with jazz and funk. In addition to being a musician, Fela was a political activist and a supporter of human rights. He used his music to denounce corruption and social injustice. Fela was physically assaulted throughout his life. Even so, he continued writing and performing music until his death. Fela Kuti remains one of the most influential musicians and activists in the world. Numerous important figures in the history of African music have been inspired by his music and legacy. As we continue, we'll take a closer look at the life of Fela Anikulapo Kuti. The reason he gave his president a coffin will also be revealed. In actuality, you might never learn the reason behind why he did something so amusing if you don't watch this video all the way through. Let's begin his story right away. Fela's early life. Fela Anikulapo Kuti was born in Abeokuta, Nigeria on October 15, 1938, with the birth name Olufela Olusegun Oludotin Ransom Kuti. His mother, Chief Fumilayo Ransom Kuti, was a well-known advocate for women's rights, and his father, Israel Oladutin Ransom Kuti, was a clergyman and teacher. Fela Kuti's mother was one of the first women in Nigeria to drive a car. Kuti's parents both played active roles in the anti-colonial movement in Nigeria. His father was once hit by a soldier with a gun because he refused to remove his cap while walking past a British flag flying at the local barracks. In addition to being the brother of two well-known Nigerian doctors, Bako Ransom Kuti and Olakoye Ransom Kuti. Kuti is also a first cousin of renowned Nobel Prize winner Professor Wole Soyinka. Fela attended Abeokuta Grammar School before being sent to London in 1958 to pursue a medical degree. However, he changed his mind and enrolled at Trinity College of Music, where he was exposed to jazz, funk, and African highlife music. His mother reluctantly made peace with this decision. While still in London, he formed the band Kula Labitos and began incorporating these influences into his music. He created his own sound, which he called Afrobeat, which is a fusion of traditional Yoruba music, Fuji music, funk, jazz, highlife, calypso, and salsa. Fela's personal life. Fela Kuti got married to his first wife, Remilukun Taylor, in 1960 while schooling at Trinity. They had 3 kids, Remy, Femi, and Shola. He then graduated from the Trinity College in 1962 and moved back to Nigeria in 1963. The people in Nigeria did not enjoy the music he was playing. He even said his mother once told him to stop playing jazz and play music his people will understand. He later left Nigeria in 1967 for Ghana. It was here he came up with his Afrobeat style of music, which changed his career. Fela's musical career. In 1969, Fela visited the United States for a tour, and he met Sandra Smith, now known as Sandra Isidore of the Black Panthers Party. Fela's encounter with the Black Panthers and their ideologies helped shape the kind of music he sang till he died. He changed from romantic ballads to politically charged songs that took aim at the government and societal ills. Sandra also introduced him to the writings of Malcolm X, Frantz Fanon, Angela Davis, and other revolutionary thinkers. Fela began to think about Africa and their cultures. This led to his change in music, using Afrobeat as a weapon. Sandra also introduced him to marijuana, and he began to smoke until the end of his life. After his tour, he went back to Nigeria. The majority of the poor people in Nigeria, however, were Fela's biggest fans because the military administration in Nigeria at the time wasn't treating the poor masses well. They'd made money from political exploitation, and because his music addressed topics that were significant to the underclass. Like Bob Marley of Jamaica, Fela was a cultural rebel who spoke for Nigeria's poor masses. To the poor masses, he was more than just a pop artist. He was more like a hero. Because of how outspoken he was in his songs, the government of Nigeria relentlessly pursued Fela from almost the moment he arrived there until his death. In 1970, Fela established a commune and lived there with his band and family. This was where his studio was located. The following year, he established a nightclub in Lagos and named it Afro Spot, where he hosted his regular shows. He started writing songs about the Nigerian government and accused them of using the country's oil reserve money for their personal needs. The government started seeing Fela as a threat and used every opportunity they had to put him in jail. Fela criticized everything about Nigeria, from their military to their families, and called the government authoritarian. He was jailed several times, harassed, and even threatened with death. One night when he was sitting at home in 1974, he heard a knock on the door, and when he opened it was the police. They knew Fela smoked a lot of marijuana, so their plan was to get him red-handed and give him a 10-year ban. Surprisingly for them, they couldn't get anything because Fela had flushed it. Stories say Fela swallowed everything. So Fela was arrested and taken to jail, which was called Calcutta. When the police couldn't find anything on the marijuana plan, they let him go. He received a lot of help and support from the prisoners there. As Fela's commune began to grow, he decided to call it the Calcutta Republic, after the incident he had in Calcutta jail. Everyone was allowed to do as they pleased there without any disturbance from the military government. Fela's religious views were quite complicated. He was neither a Muslim nor a Christian, and he often talked about the African traditional religion a lot. Even in his songs, he mentions a Yoruba deity, Ifa. His daughter, Yini Kuti, said her late dad didn't encourage them to go to church. Though her mother was a devout Christian, she didn't go to churches, and she personally went to churches only on invites from friends. He chose to go by the name Anikulapo at this time in his life rather than his given middle name, Ransom, which he claimed was a slave name. Anikulapo is defined as he who carries death in his pouch, and Fela claimed that he was in charge of his own fate. Fela and his band, now known as Africa 70, rose to fame in West Africa by relentlessly performing and recording. In 1977, Fela Kuti and Africa 70 produced the album Zombie, in which he strongly lambasted Nigerian soldiers and described the military's tactics using the zombie allegory. The album was a huge hit. It outraged the Nigerian government, which then sent 1,000 soldiers to assault the renowned Calcutta Republic, where Fela had lived. This was under the pretext of an anti-drug operation. They beat and raped thousands of residents. During the raid, Fela was brutally assaulted, and his 78-year-old mother, Familea Ransom Kuti, who was just visiting him at the time. She was thrown from a window and later on died from her injuries. During the raid, the Calcutta Republic was burned down, and Fela's studio, instruments, and master tapes were destroyed. Fela claimed that he would have been killed had it not been for a commanding officer's intervention as he was being beaten. Fela's response to the attack some days later was to deliver his late mother's coffin to the Doden barracks in Lagos, the residence of General Olusegun Obasanjo, who was the military head of government. He also wrote 2 songs, Coffin for Head of State and Unknown Soldier, referencing the official inquiry that claimed that it was unknown soldiers that destroyed the Calcutta Republic. After all this had died down, Fela returned to his normal life. Later, in 1978, Fela wed 27 ladies in a traditional ceremony. Some of Fela's brides were astrologers, African historians, traditional healers, philosophers, composers, and dancers. All of Fela's wives were hardworking, educated women from various ethnic groups in Nigeria. He believed that marrying those 27 women was a way to protect himself. He also thought that it was preferable to marry a number of women and bring them home as opposed to marrying one woman and continuing to sleep outside with other women. However, 8 years after their marriage, Fela Anikulapo Kuti divorced all of them, which was devastating for the women. He said that his wives' jealousy and greed were a direct result of his marriage to them, and he could no longer stand their behavior. Fela had 7 children, 2 of whom are Grammy nominees, Femi Kuti and Son Kuti. Do you find this video interesting? Encourage us to keep making videos like this by liking and subscribing to the New Tourist channel. Also turn on notifications so you get notified when we upload other interesting videos like this. Let's continue. Fela, the activist. Fela defied police opposition and opened another Africa shrine in Ikija, Nigeria. He consistently denounced the military dictatorship in Nigeria and its corrupt officials. He also advocated for Nigerian citizens' rights, such as their freedom of speech, access to clean water, and access to high-quality healthcare. Through his music and activism, Fela inspired a cultural movement in Nigeria that backed social justice and political change. Fela was actively involved in African politics from the 1970s. He condemned both the mistreatment of Nigerian citizens and the country's corrupt administration. Fela felt that colonialism was to blame for the socioeconomic and political problems that plagued the African people. Nigeria was one of the most corrupt countries in Africa in the 1970s, making corruption one of the most important political issues on the continent. It was then that Fela recorded the song ITT. He strategically used the acronym ATT to mean International Thief. The administration's election was manipulated. There were coups, poverty, economic inequality, unemployment, and political instability got worse, while also fostering crime and corruption. Fela's protest songs portrayed socioeconomic injustice and corruption as African realities. His political messages were heard all over Africa. Fela's outspoken criticism of the brutal and authoritarian government in charge of Nigeria had severe repercussions. He was often detained. He was detained on more than 200 different occasions, with his longest sentence being 20 months. Fela started publishing contentious political articles in the advertising sections of daily and weekly newspapers like the Daily Times and the Punch in the years after his arrest in 1974, dodging editorial censorship in Nigeria's military-run media. Fela published these articles under the title Chief Priest Say in the 1970s and early 1980s. Fela spoke on a variety of topics, denouncing the criminal actions of the Nigerian government, the exploitative nature of Islam and Christianity toward the underprivileged, and the evils of multinational corporations. The Punch and the Daily Times eventually decided to cancel Chief Priest Say. Back then, it was widely believed that the editors of Chief Priest Say had received death threats from the Nigerian government, which was the reason for the publication's cancellation. Kuti's lyrics exposed his most inner thoughts. His rise to fame throughout the 1970s signaled a change in music as an art form and how Nigeria's socio-political discourse interacted. In 1984, he criticized the autocratic president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria at the time, General Muhammadu Buhari. He described Buhari as an animal in a madman's body in Beast of No Nation, one of his most well-known songs. Fela was said to have always promoted peace among Africans, and he had a strong sense of pride in his native continent. Fela preached that supporting local traditional religions and lifestyles was the most crucial thing Africans could do to counter European cultural imperialism. In terms of his political views, Fela was also influenced by the American Black Power movement. He supported socialism, Pan-Africanism, as well as an independent, democratic African republic. Many African leaders, including Thomas Sankara and Kwame Nkrumah, had the support of Fela. We also have an interesting video on our page, which talks about the rise and fall of Thomas Sankara. The link has been added to this video. Make sure you watch it. Since Fela was a vocal supporter of human rights, his songs specifically targeted Nigeria's militaristic governments of the 1970s and 1980s. He also condemned fellow Africans for abandoning traditional African culture, particularly the upper class. Fela Anikulapo Kuti, until the time of his death, recorded over 20 albums, which include Open and Close in 1971, Beast of No Nation 1989, Zombie 1976, Shakara 1972, Sorrow Tears in 1973, and much more. These albums are still priceless and are played to this day across the world. Fela's death. Rumors started circulating that Fela was suffering from an illness in which he was refusing to take treatment. On June of 1997, ill health forced him to cancel a European tour, and in late July he was admitted in the hospital. Olakoye Ransom Kuti, the singer's brother, broke the news of the flamboyant singer's passing on national television. At the time, Fela was 58 and no cause of death was disclosed. After learning the news, throngs of shocked and emotional fans gathered in front of Fela's nightclub to pay their last respects. It is said a total of about 158,000 people gathered there. Later, at a press conference with other family members, Dr. and former Health Minister Ransom Kuti confirmed that Fela had passed away from heart failure brought on by HIV/AIDS. That immediately caused people to wonder if any of Fela's 27 wives had the illness. Shun, his youngest son, assumed leadership of Egypt 80, Kuti's former band. The group is still going strong as of 2023, putting out music as Shun Kuti and Egypt 80. Despite the fact that Fela was occasionally arrested by the government, he persisted in speaking out against injustice and corruption in Nigeria up until his death in 1997. His activism and music are still influencing political and social movements in Africa and other parts of the world. His activism for a better Africa has influenced many African activists, just as his music has influenced many musicians around the world to denounce political injustice through their songs. Fela's legacy lives on. We have come to the end of this video. Let us know what you think about the life of Fela in the comments section. Also, like and subscribe to the New Tourist channel. Do not forget to turn on notifications so you are notified whenever we upload interesting videos about Africa. Thanks for watching, and see you in our next video.
I sing a song, I sing Kalakuta show, Kalakuta show.